Hello, everyone. I'm Lisa Simonian with the Neocon team, and thank you for joining us for this afternoon's session with David Tracy and Dan Marino from the lab at Rockwell Group. Just a couple of items before we get started. The session today qualifies for accreditation, and certification will be emailed within 3 business days to everybody who stays on for the full session. More details on credits are available on our Neocon website under programming. Also, the final 15 minutes of the session will be Q&A with David and Dan. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, not the chat box, the Q&A box. So let's get started with a little background on David and Dan. As the Director of Technology for the lab at Rockwell Group, David Tracy specializes in projects that thoughtfully and beautifully incorporate technology and interaction into their surroundings. He sees technology as an architectural material, an element that shapes our experience of the spaces we inhabit as much as steel and concrete. Through a career that has woven together computer science, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, design, and theory, first at Gensler and now at the lab, David brings a broad and balanced set of skills to problem solving for a wide range of design challenges, from prototyping to concept design and architecture, and he thrives in collaborative environments. Dan Marino is an architect and the design director of the lab at Rockwell Group. His work focuses on experience master planning and architectural storytelling to translate brands into immersive environments. Prior to joining Rockwell Group, Dan's interests in branding and architectural identity led to collaborations with a unique array of clients, including Samsung, The Row, the New York City Department of Transportation, and the US Department of State for Expo 2015 in Milan. The lab at Rockwell Group is a multidisciplinary design studio within the Rockwell Group, leveraging strategy, architecture, and creative technology to deliver bespoke experiences for a growing list of international technology, hospitality, and retail brands such as Google, Facebook, Intel, Nike, MGM Resorts, Hard Rock Resorts, among others. Their award-winning work has been published internationally, and they recently have completed and opened Journey to Edge, the highest observation deck in the Northern Hemisphere at Hudson Yards. Next week, May 26th, the Rockwell Group comes out with their book Drama by David Rockwell and Bruce Mao, and it will be available on Phaidon and Amazon. So now I'm going to pass the screen over to David and Dan. Welcome.
Thank you. So here we go.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, Amelia, and thank you for inviting us to speak at Neocon. Yeah, I just, from a personal note, we really love going to Neocon every year. We're excited to go in October, but you know, these virtual forums for the past year have been fun and different in their own way, but we're definitely excited to be all together again and party in Chicago. So I'm Dan. I'm design director at the lab at Rockwell Group, and with me is David Tracy, our director of creative technology. We're gonna give you guys a talk today about living architecture and the way that we kind of integrate spatial media into projects of our own and at Rockwell Group at large, with a lot of different collaborators as well. Through what we're gonna think to be is about a 45-minute talk. We thought we were gonna have a hard time hitting that, but all of a sudden we have all this stuff to talk about. So we're going to run through it as quickly as we can. I think at the end, we're going to leave some time for questions. So let's get the show on the road. So Rockwell Group, you may or may not be familiar with, has been really delivering hospitality and interiors for about 30 years, designing spaces that bring people together. Obviously, spectacle and narrative and architecture immersion are big topics and themes amongst the body of work the company has done over this time. Some recent projects here that run the gamut from, you know, pop-up restaurants for a pandemic during COVID in New York City and across the country, as well as kind of Broadway shows. There's a huge range of what we deliver, but the common themes are really about kind of spectacle, and we'll talk about drama as well. And so who we are within that larger company are a small team, a multidisciplinary team of strategists, storytellers, architects, designers, technologists, and software developers. And the approach of our studio is not just a multidisciplinary one, but particularly one that leverages these three disciplines in ways that uniquely can deliver projects for the company at large and for outside clients of our own. And so David will talk kind of the roots of the team, which are really in kind of tinkering and R&D.
Yeah. So the lab actually started around 15 years ago as a true research and development arm of the firm, exploring ways that kind of emerging technology, audiovisual tech, and tangible media can be applied in space for really like kind of bespoke architectural applications. The studio was initially funded by a single client, but over the years, we've kind of evolved and shifted into more of a proper design studio, taking on projects of our own and collaborating within studios, within Rockwell Group with other studios, but also with outside collaborators very frequently. You know, we've gone from kind of exploring the novel applications of technology in space to really kind of seeing ourselves as building memorable experiences. And our three pillars or ingredients we use to do that are space, story, and technology. Probably the most foundational one for us that really is very closely related to hospitality design and is kind of baked into the DNA of our studio and Rockwell Group is this notion of story and weaving story into every environment that we craft. It's really the foundation of our process, not literally as necessarily a 3-act or a kind of a sequential story that we're trying to tell in space, but really one that's centered around the visitor experience and the way that the space and the architecture plays into that experience. And we also, we like to consider the spaces that we craft as evoking the possible. Since there isn't necessarily a signature aesthetic with our work in the lab, we do have a kind of consistent sense of curiosity and a process that leads us to kind of novel outcomes. And really, I think that all of those suggest what is possible of architecture and interiors through the use of interactivity and audiovisual media in space. And we're going to share a few of those strategies of how we deploy spatial media with you in a moment. And then the last piece for us is, you know, we create technology that really invites participation and engages the users of space. And so a big part of that is using technology, and oftentimes real-time technologies, sensing, audiovisual generation, and to facilitate really playful engagements. Because what good is architecture without engaging the people that animate it? So a lot of the work that we do around technologies is really exploring how our spaces can invite participation, play, and then ultimately kind of reinforcing this idea of storytelling. And really, this is where our studio kind of ties back not only into the lineage of hospitality at Rockwell Group, but the lineage of R&D with the iteration of the lab from 15 years ago.
And so in short, we like to say that we love drama, not necessarily dramatic clients, but we like drama in the work and how it's delivered. Drama as a topic is interesting in particular because of lessons of theater and the kind of the roots of David's approach to kind of the spectacular performance of an environment, which I think as interior designers, we've been doing for a long time. And like we like to say that hospitality design is kind of the OG experience design in the sense that we've all thought already long and hard about not just the materials of an environment that someone walks into, but what are the rituals of stepping into a restaurant or stepping into a hotel. And as interior designers, we've been thinking about experience for a long time, and particularly hospitality designers have. So what lessons can we learn from that, let's say, lens of design that we can apply into our applications of media and space.
And certainly leveraging this idea of drama, and also David's love for theater. David Rockwell is a very successful Broadway theater designer as well. And so really leveraging the kind of shared lineage there in the theater world to kind of explore these different themes around within our work, including engagement with the audience, using using a space and the elements of it to really, consider our work as an exercise in world building, inviting participants into the process, not only for kind of moments of surprise and delight, but also to kind of change a space over time, and then more explicitly kind of building a kind of lore and backstory and narrative to the spaces that we put out into the world. And that can kind of specifically manifest as like an individual's journey through a space, and how that ties into all of the choreography of architectural elements in media. And then, one of the other things that, we explore commonly in our work is this idea of impermanence. And when we have, pieces out in the world that are constantly shifting and changing over time, they may never appear in the same way again twice.
So we're going to talk through about 8 projects that we think kind of cover the gamut of how we have strategies for spatial media in space. And a lot of those kind of theatrical operators that we just discussed in that list play out across these projects. So they actually cover a number of years for us in terms of, starting early. Actually, these are not in chronological order, but in terms of size and scale, I think they do a pretty good job of showing just the breadth of the type of project that we've been executing, at least within the last 5 years. So we're going to start with Tau, which is actually the Tau Group, and Tau had us work on this concept a number of years ago, and there is one here in Chicago. And what's interesting about our application in this restaurant and hospitality experience was not just about the ritual of the approach and the kind of the hype of the arrival, but also just the entire theatrical experience of eating in this space. There is this moment of kind of stepping down into the restaurant that is very see and be seen moment. It is quite theatrical in itself. But particularly the piece that we worked on is a 30-foot tall Kuan Yin sculpture, which you can see in the video, which we projection mapped to serve as not just a backdrop, but really as kind of a character during your experience throughout the night. And what's particularly important here is we kind of labeled this as conversation starter. How can we kind of insert moments of media that are not distractions or shows, but actually something to talk about, have a piece of an element of design that can be a conversation starter. And the delicacies of how you work out the timelines of how you deliver content here are super important to the process, where this isn't something that's drawing distraction or drawing attention to itself, but rather something that is helping your dinner and your course along. Every 15 minutes, a piece of bespoke content comes on. And as it gets deeper into the evening, it gets a little wilder and wackier and weirder. But for us, this is kind of a kind of tried and true focal point of how projection mapping can be leveraged in these environments just to create a new architectural medium.
And one of the approaches we also love taking with our projects is actually designing and building out a platform for content. And oftentimes we will kind of seed that platform with a few initial pieces. I think initially this was 8 pieces of content that were about, let's say 90 seconds long each, that activated every 15 minutes, so that over the course of a dinner, you would never see the same 2 pieces until you made a repeat visit. That platform has expanded now, and there are now it continues to get contributed to, and so we've kind of put it out into the world and opened up the platform for other people to contribute to, and that's a paradigm that we really love taking with our work.
Actually very specific to the next project we're going to show in terms of a platform. So this is the Cosmopolitan Hotel in Las Vegas. This was actually an existing building that had to be retrofit for the Cosmo. And so we were assigned to kind of deliver a high level narrative, which we structured for them to kind of create the concept behind. It was actually this kind of long story of about kind of a naughty Alice's visit to Wonderland and Vegas. And we were kind of given this lobby space, which is actually quite difficult with a number of kind of very important structural columns, which we could not move. So how could we actually leverage media as a material to actually create a very compact and kind of claustrophobic arrival moment into something that is actually almost like an infinity chamber of immense expansive space. So, leveraging polished marbles and mirrored ceilings to actually create that infinity moment in the year that this was done was quite different. But more importantly, how do you not just clad columns, but actually leverage them in content that expands the space itself? So we actually worked with Jerry Mitchell, Broadway choreographer, to develop this piece of content here, which we thought was quite interesting to actually show how the columns can expand space between them and share media across them. So the platform that we built here, we seeded with, again, I think 10 pieces, and now local artists have been engaging these themselves. And I think there's over like 200 unique pieces of artwork that are used on these columns throughout the day and year. So a completely different project, which was completed now a year and a half ago at the National Building Museum, is called Lawn. So this is a 30,000 square foot temporary installation, which to us really displays what we're calling a layered experience. So, sometimes we approach technology without a screen. I think, people often think like, oh, can we insert technology to this? You're throwing a screen on the wall. But in fact, there wasn't a single screen involved in this entire installation. Just a note in terms of this being a temporary event, in the world of delivering these large scale pieces, we were very sensitive to actually making something that could be reusable, rented, and actually repurposed afterwards. So this is actually a 30,000 square foot deployment of Sinlawn, which is a soy-based and sugarcane-based faux lawn material that actually can get brushed, and it feels quite soft. And on top of that, we actually worked with Chalk Carpets to deliver a massive cloudscape interpretation graphic carpet for the arrival. The technology integrated into this actually were about the narrative of storytelling and being on a lawn in the summertime. So you can actually relax in these hammocks and hear storytellers from across America telling their own experiences of summer and their lawn, or whatever lawn was to them growing up. And then embedded in this entire landscape was a massive soundscape of about 56 channels of audio, delivering a uniquely composed audio track that is spatialized. So when you're sitting in the grass, you can have an intimate moment with a bee or hear the ice cream truck go by, as if we're kind of expanding the space. And then at nighttime, we're actually leveraging a full day parting aspect of that, where people can actually be given blankets and experience kind of watching movies at nighttime.
And I think, as Dan mentioned, it's oftentimes really easy to associate technology and space with like screens and kind of large format media. But again, just to reinforce how powerful audio was in this space and creating really an augmented, layered experience. I think the power of a really compelling audio environment is not to be overlooked. But another component of this kind of what we're calling layered experience was a more playful engagement using kind of emerging augmented reality frameworks. So accompanying the lawn, we also developed an app for iOS and Android, which I think in theory should still be up on both of the stores. I haven't looked in a while, but maybe it's worth checking out. That really allowed people to, and it was tied to the space, so it was spatial AR. That it allowed people to capture fireflies. There were 100 fireflies in the space. And I think if one were to try and capture all of them, it would take maybe 45 minutes. So I'm not entirely sure if anybody ever caught them all. But this was another tactic we used to kind of layer an additional phenomena on top of this space. So on the kind of maybe contrasting with the lawn, we do take other projects that are larger format and more visual based. And so for 299 Park Avenue, we developed an interactive art piece that is software driven and rendered in real time. And what that means for us is that it can facilitate interactivity, and then it's also constantly changing over time. So there's no guarantee that you will ever see the same canvas twice. And kind of playing on the theme of impermanence that we talked a little bit about earlier is that not only does this content change over the course of the day, it changes over the course of the season, and we also rotate it out seasonally. So you know, at each quarter, at each season, we're kind of deploying a new content piece that's not only kind of an art piece for the users of the building, but because of its prominent location on Park Avenue, we are this is also a public art piece, very highly visible from the street. You know, the other thing that is for this type of deployment that is important to us is allowing people to walk right up to this thing, is not as just a, you know, a 16:9 screen mounted on a wall, but something that people can actually get up close and personal to, and have a kind of at scale human interaction with, is something that we find really compelling with these types of interactions. So a few just kind of notes on the project that and how it all comes together. So there's a really massive kind of continuous LED display behind the reception desk. And you can also see these triangular kind of cutouts in the desk that also have displays that mirrors the content on the wall. And this is all facilitated and enabled by a number of depth sensing cameras that are mounted in the ceiling that are basically giving us a top-down view of how people are using the space. It's all very much anonymized, so it's mostly about like where people are in space and how they're moving through the space, but really giving us the ability to like make this canvas bloom and come to life and change constantly. And you know, the next project we'll take a look at is one that's been a really successful temporary project for us every year. It's actually a holiday deployment at Brookfield Place in Manhattan every year. And so this is the sixth year running. It's called Luminaries. And this is what we would qualify as something that's more of a tangible interaction. This is one that's a really beloved project by our studio and the firm. Just because of the participation and performance and ritual of all of it. And so because it is a holiday activation, there is this kind of unifying theme around the universality of light and this kind of constantly shifting canopy. There's a number of things that happen in this space. So one, there's this ritual of wish making. And so that involves this visitors coming up to these what are called wish kiosks in the space and actually touching them to start cycling through colors. When they make a wish and release their wish into the canopy, a burst of matching color spreads through the canopy and is released into this kind of like grand scale celebration of their wish. Kind of from a gift giving and philanthropic sense, Brookfield Place also matches with every wish made. They make a donation to a group every year. So there's this kind of wonderful ritual around wish making and gift giving that I think kind of brings us all together around the holidays. One of the things we rolled this project out last year in a very interesting time in Manhattan. Kind of in kind of the midst of COVID. And so what that meant was we had to repurpose some of our wishing kiosks to go completely touch-free, which actually ended up being a really kind of magical interaction itself. So instead of having this like explicitly tangible touch interaction with the cube, it became completely gestural. And that's something we've been seeing a lot more frequently this past year.
An important thing to note about just the scale of interaction there is having an intimate individual reaction result or be rewarded by quite a large scale response from a piece of content. That we talk a lot about the legibility of our interactions of like, you know, if you do a swipe on a wall or pass by something and you don't even notice it, but something like this as an example is something we use often just to show just the power of scale in a lot of these media installations, that we can actually have something quite small as, you know, lifting your arms up, change something so massive effortlessly is pretty powerful to a lot of our visitors and users.
And moving on to our next project, we get into less about the explicit interactions with visitors in space, but more like truly choreographed architectural spectacles. So these types of projects where we're bringing together architectural lighting systems, custom outputs like a central waterfall and addressable rain dropping system, with traditional audiovisual projection systems and kind of LED elements behind cast glass, is really similar to how a Broadway show and a dance performance might be choreographed. And that going all through all of the phases that are involved with that type of choreography to really tell the story and bring a space to life. So it's similar to how kind of the kind of narrative arc of our Tau project. This isn't something that's in like kind of full blown spectacle mode all day long, but something that comes to life on hourly, as hourly shows throughout the day, to kind of form into these kind of really massive architectural performances. So a lot of the work that we do here is really just kind of thinking through how all of these elements can kind of participate together in space simultaneously. And so for us, that requires the development of custom pre-visualization tools and custom software to just even think through how we start to design around these elements. But then ultimately, middleware to kind of bring all of these things together and make them communicate into these as big spectacles.
Not to mention the multiple forms of media that we delivered for this, from choreography of audio to lighting to the waterfall, as well as the content we developed in-house. So we often work with motion graphic designers to develop bespoke content for these applications, whether it be a project like 299 or for Hard Rock. But what's interesting is when you think about them, they're not just on a screen, they're being seen from all different angles and all different sides. And we have to develop custom tools to be able to experience those at scale prior to getting there. So, you think about what goes into delivering a show like this is a lot of planning. You can't just turn it on and deliver it in a week. So a lot of that planning goes into a heavy lift in things like VR, that allow us to simulate these things ahead of time. So speaking of kind of spectacles and immersive entertainment, we're working on a project called Luminarium, which is actually opening this summer in Atlanta, which is kind of taking that physical environment to the next level of actually producing an entirely digital environment that can take people anywhere across the world on a very, very high fidelity and almost 4D experience. So from spatialized beamforming audio to haptics, to completely 360 laser projection, we're now building in game engine complete environments of architectural interiors and delivering those as experiences themselves. So for Luminarium in particular, we're developing a series of bar environments from a hospitality standpoint. So we actually build these in programs like Cinema 4D as 3D environments, and we work with interior designers to actually pick the materials and render them out, because they will be shown at 1-to-1 scale, such that we can create a full interior environment actually rendered out at scale in, let's say this one's going to be a 3,000 square foot with 22-foot high walls. So you can really build a full Shibuya night market scene and actually control that as a generative piece. So the same technology we're using for something like that 299 work, we're leveraging here as well, where this is actually entirely software driven and run in a game engine. So people are literally sitting, yes, in a video game, but we've rendered it in such a way that we can actually play with space, play with material, and actually adjust the lighting in real time over the course of the evening, or let special things occur throughout the night, like things flicker, or maybe there might be a takeover of holograms or things of that nature. So we're delivering about 6 of these bar environments that are going to run in Atlanta and hopefully in other cities as well.
And I'll just add one of the affordances of this type of approach to design. It's like, we as Dan mentioned, we kind of flex our interior design skills to kind of build out these worlds. But of course, we can kind of go beyond the limits of what we can do in actual space and kind of play with kind of I'll call it like magical realism or beyond realism or surrealism in a lot of these environments, which is a really fun place to be operating in.
Which again, in the attractions world, we also got to work with KPF on the observation deck at Hudson Yards and actually delivering the full arrival and line and security experience for that observation deck. So this is, this kind of fits in almost like an exhibit design category of kind of spatialized storytelling. We actually created 2 redundant floors to support an elevator experience, a security experience, as well as really telling the story of Hudson Yards as a neighborhood, as the new neighborhood in New York, as an engineering marvel, really narratively driven by this notion of the trains never stopped. The fact that they built this entire neighborhood and never stopping the trains the entire time was kind of something that we grasped onto to tell that story in an engaging manner. We leveraged a number of not just LED and projection strategies here, but also kind of low-res LED monitors. There's a model of New York City that is entirely delivered as perforated metal ceiling panels that actually tells the story while you're in security with video monitors together of the various neighborhoods of New York prior to Hudson Yards that were kind of important parts in the timeline of the city's urban growth. And then things like these moments of the caisson forest, which actually has incredible audio accompanying it in both the subway scene and the caisson forest, telling the story not just with actually no audio words at all, but actually just sound effects and really driven narrative content.
So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking, maybe getting into the weeds and pulling back the curtain just a little bit, talking about the kind of tools that we use in our studio and the approaches that we take as we're making these projects, and like not only from an execution standpoint, but from a design and process standpoint as well. And we don't have a kind of well-established or like a definitive stack of tools, but more of like an ecosystem of software and hardware systems that we oftentimes use to design, develop, prototype, and execute our work. And so on the software side, we're oftentimes finding ourselves using game engines to kind of prototype and build out interactive systems. So whether that's Unity or Unreal, we find ourselves using tools like Open Frameworks or Touch Designer to prototype and kind of understand how a base interaction will play out over time in space. And then kind of as in the more like back-end plumbing world, we're oftentimes the backbone of a lot of our work is sitting on top of Node, which is a really robust JavaScript framework for doing applications. And we also find ourselves using tools like React for front-end kiosks and touch points. This is not nowhere near an exhaustive list for us, but one that's a little more limited and edited. But on the hardware side, more recently we've been working with companies like Ouster, who makes a pretty incredible LiDAR device, Microsoft for some of their computer vision solutions. We do a lot of previs and design in game engine, and then ultimately in VR. So we're finding ourselves using Oculus and HTC Vive quite a bit, and leveraging additional computer vision tools from Intel. And then kind of graphics advancements from NVIDIA. In some of these bigger spectacles that we are rolling out more frequently, it's these kind of massive media outputs tend to have a common backbone, and that oftentimes is disguise for us. So just a few minutes on some of the things we're building and some of the approaches we're taking to facilitate these types of projects. So this is a video capture of actually at this point quite an early prototype. This is actually production working software at this point. But this uses a network of LiDAR devices concurrently running to kind of create a massive point cloud of a space for us. And what we can do with that is we can start to combine and calibrate those points as a unified whole. And then we can start, doing things like processing that point cloud, taking different views from it, and starting to do some real computer vision on top of it to identify where people are in space, how they're moving through the space. We're very conscious in the studio of considerations for privacy, and so in every case for our projects, all data and tracking is anonymized. But this is really more of a means to enable spatial interactions, a way to bring spaces to life, and a way to invite that participation and engagement with the spaces that we put out into the world. Another big part of what we do in the studio is real-time content generation. And so whether that's through custom applications that we're building using creative coding frameworks, or through game engines, we are constantly and more frequently prototyping and building with real-time content tools. And so this is out of Unity, and this is a piece that we're working on that's all about nebulas. And so this is all this is a capture of real-time content and actually a prototype that we're doing to test performance of these kind of massive nebula systems that were being rendered in real time. So for us, it's a kind of the kind of enabling interactions is really through the sensing systems, and then the outputs are through real-time content generations. And as we mentioned a little earlier about our Hard Rock project, the complexity of our ecosystem, the number of elements in the space, really demanded a custom simulation tool. And so you can see here that there are a few things going on. There's architectural lighting, there's audiovisual, there's projection, and then there's this central rain curtain that is kind of addressable and kind of coming in different patterns. This was all custom software that was written just to do this, because there was really nothing we could use that would bring all of these, at the time at least, there was nothing we could use to bring all of these systems together to like really understand how our timeline and our choreography would change over time. And so for projects like this, where we have large choreographed architectural spectacles, it's almost almost a requirement for the design process that we have to use these.
And you can imagine, as a designer, that I get to work with someone like David that has tools that they're, and of course, I don't fully understand everything he just said either. So, a lot of these tool sets and these software from a designer standpoint are just open up so many doors for us to think about media as a material. And, it's something when we kind of have a lot of conversations with interior designers at Rockwell Group at large, of just thinking about technology as more than just a screen on the wall, as an actual interior. It should be on a mood board as an interior palette, because these are more than just screens. They have lighting effects. You can actually bring architecture to life in many different ways. Audio as well is a complete medium that you can use as an interior designer to create emotion and feeling on space. And so obviously these tools are super important, because it's not a flat world, and you have to experience these things from many different angles. Just a note on the nebulas that you guys were looking at before, like those of course get built out, and then we think about, what is it like to actually stand inside one of these things spatially? We're actually looking at this for one of the bar environments currently, and you could imagine what that might feel like, and what that might look like. And some of these previous tools that we have allow us to actually experience that and sculpt it as designers, which is really awesome, and kind of opens so many doors in terms of spatial design. We have one more slide of this.
And lastly, kind of bringing it all together is what it's all about for us. And so Again, this is a prototype that we developed recently, but this really combines it all. It combines spatial design, design of media, user experience design, and software development and prototyping. And so really kind of inviting participation, creating a sense of drama, surprise, spectacle is something that kind of keeps us motivated in the studio. And of course, as we all know, as designers, seeing it made real is the most amazing thing.
Yeah.
So
this slide, in terms of what Rockwell Group does at large, and probably David, if we have the 8 up of the projects and their themes, there was quite a wide range of those in terms of how media can be used. And I think if you kind of go through the projects, as David mentioned a while back in the talk, there is no kind of singular aesthetic to our work, but there is a unique approach to telling the stories of our clients, and also focusing in on the visitor as the guest, as the center of design from an interaction standpoint, because we have to put ourselves in their shoes, whether they are 3 feet tall and as a child, or 6'5" as like a very tall basketball player. Like, we have to be able to design for all of the ranges of types of bodies, from an accessibility standpoint as well. Audio can play a big role, and visually they can as well. So we have to think from multi-layers of how we start to address these, and make stories available to all. And narrative, as we all know, doesn't need to be explicit. You don't need to slap someone in the face with narrative, but from a design process standpoint, it's a very useful tool, especially if you're bringing your clients along for the ride of designing it together and really telling their story, or enabling them to create a story for their brand or their restaurant, or whatever their kind of goals are for the project. So that's how we use narrative, really, as kind of a tool for conversation with our clients, but also an internal tool for kind of measuring every step of the process. So thank you, but I think we're gonna open up for some questions.
Yeah, and there are a few that have been posed in the Q&A panel.
Okay.
So we can.
Do you want to pick one?
Sure.
It's fine.
So maybe we'll just go down the line. So I think the question is, how do you think COVID has and will continue to reinforce the importance of experience design? We hear so often lately about the importance of experience and branding post-pandemic office space. Mm-hmm. I think that's a really relevant question for us lately. Is what particularly beyond just workplace and office space design, like, what has this last year meant to all of us, where we've all been basically working remotely and learning how to do that remotely. And in the lab, I would say we're a little we're maybe a little more future back than some other studios. And so for a long time, we've been pretty effective remote collaborators. So to be totally honest, we haven't been impacted, like our productivity and our work hasn't been impacted. But in terms of experience design and what it means for coming back in the real world, I think it only reinforces the importance of kind of the consideration for user experience and the kind of the overall impact of going back to space. There has to be a really important reason for gathering in space, and some of those are just givens. We're all gonna, we will all hopefully soon be back congregating for meals at restaurants. But for our office spaces, I think that it's for us, it's really going to be about what is the value of meeting in person, and we really think that for our studio, it's about collaboration, mentorship, and also kind of aligning around a shared space and an identity together. Yeah. And I really think all of those things are the core of experience design and hospitality design, to be honest.
Yeah, and also there are a lot of people that are going to be very comfortable with staying at home and needing a reason to leave the home. And so yes, there's the elements of what can we not do at home in terms of as designers, but how do we design spaces that make people want to leave their house? And what are not just the potential amenities, but how do we kind of rethink space use to provide for alternative uses, not just giving more people more space, but actually thinking about that break space as something that is very important. The use of space for social interaction being hyper important, in my opinion, and then actually communicating why a brand chooses to have a physical space at all. I think for a long time, the tech sector was investing heavily in their office spaces because they wanted people to go there. And now you have all these offices kind of sitting empty. So more things need to be offered to get people to come. But I think there are a lot of adaptations that are going to come out in terms of smart use of space, in terms of smart spaces for collaboration, and definitely spaces that make people want to leave and have a different experience. I do think restaurants are not going anywhere, and everyone loves going out to eat. So thankfully we're safe in that zone, but there need to be more higher level. The bar is set higher to get people out of their house. Okay, the next question. How much do you use? Oh, no, Natasha. How much consideration goes into the environment or impact of these hyper-technological spaces, particularly in terms of technology changing and potentially becoming obsolete so quickly? How long is the typical lifespan of these projects? So I'll let David field that one. I have my own opinions about it, but DT.
Sure. So maybe I'll start from the bottom and then work my way up. So the typical life of these types of projects really varies depending on the type of application. I mean, we I think, commonly commercial leases are 10 years. And we have a number of projects, even, the lab has been in existence for about 15 years. We have projects that are still out there. And I know this because when I check our remote monitoring tools, I still see that one museum project that's in DC that is like still up and running somehow over, for like 13 years. But it really varies in terms of the application of the project. I think as we look at a project like the Hard Rock Oculus, and that's something that is going to be a feature for more than 10 years, and with a kind of a menagerie of architectural elements. And I really think that moving up to your next question, in terms of technology changing and becoming obsolete so quickly, particularly in regards to environmental impact, as I mentioned just a minute ago, a lot of our projects have legs and have lasted, have stood the test of time. That doesn't mean they don't need maintenance and TLC every so often, but for a lot of projects, and I kind of wish we would have shown 605 Third Avenue, which basically uses this, you can think of it as a giant calculator screen that basically runs on the required power of like 2 light bulbs that to create this kind of massive media expression on the exterior of a building. But a lot of what we try to design is maybe not so much in complete consideration of like what the latest trend is, but like how can we use technology to embed a space with narrative and tell a story and kind of embed some timelessness into the design. Yep. As far as consideration for the environmental impact of the spaces that we build, it's something we talk about quite a bit. Obviously, the depending on the use of technology, and what the application is, there are varying kind of considerations, not only for electrical usage, but like perhaps HVAC cooling and conditioning of spaces just to run the experiences. And it is a constant dialogue that we have, that we really try to balance with kind of a notion for the materials that are used in the space, and also like the kind of working with the client to make sure that that this is part of the story that we're trying to tell. So it's important for us for some of our larger format tech pieces to be kind of mission sensitive and kind of carry a story along with the activation.
Yeah, and that satisfies, because down to the selection of hardware. And I think we are quite vocal, and I think us as designers have to continue to be more vocal with our vendors about what we prefer in terms of performance and output. Some of the projectors that are required to be used output so much heat, and that kind of spirals back into an HVAC system, has to run constantly to extract that heat. So in terms of the selection of hardware, we do choose more often than not hardware elements that are probably more friendly to the environment in terms of what they output, how much power they require, and how much heat they put out. But also, there are some elements that leveraging something in a digital format instead of an analog actually can save, in the sense of like, shifting wayfinding. Oftentimes wayfinding, once it's converted to digital, actually saves teams, or at least operational staff, the trouble of having to print so much for every day. Think about kind of your hotel conference and events back end, a lot of kind of integrated media to support those events, if they can remain digital, do save a lot of waste. So there's kind of two sides to how it can be approached, but yes, we really need to be kind of strategic in deploying these. But it does come down to the hardware and the vendors that are producing them. And I do think that a lot of them are making quite an effort to move in the direction of using less resources to deliver high performance. Okay, how much do you VR?
Yeah, so I'll take this one. So we use we use VR quite often, but I think the more important distinction is like real-time technologies. I think throughout in architecture at the moment in our firm and in our studio, we still will use kind of traditional rendering approaches to pre-visualize and kind of facilitate a design process. But I think the kind of inevitability for visualization and rendering and design is that everything is kind of moving toward real time. And so if you're an ArcViz person out there who's been jamming in V-Ray for a while, I think it might be a good time to pick up Unity or Unreal.
Yeah, subtle suggestion. Andrea, so what role does understanding the software play in ideation? That's super important. Does a digital designer need to know the back end of all the software in order to ideate, or do you use programmers, renderers, etc.? Better yet, what percentage of your renderers or programmers have a background in interior design or architecture? Okay, I'll field this one as the person often that has to collaborate with creative technologists like Dave Tracy and his team. So I personally do not know how to code, but when we leverage same shared languages and tool sets, it's super important to collaboration. So I do understand what can be done in certain softwares, but it's really about close collaboration across disciplines, so that, let's say if I'm creative directing on a piece of content, and I'm speaking to software developers about what we need to get done, it's important for someone like Dave Tracy, who secretly actually used to be an architect himself, to actually help translate those kind of design directions. And so understanding what can be done in software is super important, I still think, but you don't personally need to be able to code yourself. And actually, I found quite open arms from a lot of software developers who want to get into spatial media, in terms of kind of embracing a design sensibility and a design language and vocabulary, and injecting that into the work. What we can bring to the table as designers is thinking spatially, and being able to kind of work with software developers and work with renderers and motion graphic designers who live in a screen-based environment, and get them to think spatially. So that's kind of what we can bring to the table there. And from a rendering standpoint, we often love to work with people who have an interior design background, but we also work with people who come from the movies and come from storytelling. So, we work with people that used to work in DreamWorks as motion graphics people, who know nothing about architecture, but they still know how to tell a story or how to build a world. Some people we're working with are actually video game designers, who are really pride themselves in world building and don't need to worry about physics at all. So a lot of those things in terms of putting a bunch of minds in a room for a brainstorm are super interesting. But no, you don't need to know software to be able to work at the lab.
Yeah, I also want to add, and it seems like my headphone's about to die, so I apologize if I dip out. I'll fix it. So, another it is, we have this vocabulary because we're a multidisciplinary studio. There's always whenever someone starts, there's always this kind of like language that they have to learn of the lab, and that combines the kind of architectural vernacular, the kind of UX interactive language, and then the more like technical side of things. But that is something that happens pretty quickly. And in fact, it's not important for our designers to know the ins and outs and the complete capabilities of the software tools and the processes that we use on the tech team. And in fact, I think the way that I would look at the relationship of design is design should be, really aspirational and like have fewer constraints than what we have on the technology side. And it's kind of up to us to kind of figure out how to make it possible, or to sometimes put rails on that process. So, I like to try and keep the design team like aspirational.
Let them.
And then he cracks the reality check on us. So yeah, I think we have maybe like 4 minutes. I don't know if we can do like one more question. I saw a question about how do you see print and digital experiences merging? I think that's super great question. Just particularly with a lot of the clients that are coming to us from a print world or from, let's say, an analog world, attempting to get more and more into digital formats. And there are a number of streams that we've been kind of working on them to deliver experiences for, whether that is actually traditional prints that you can engage with the actual periodical itself through a second screen application like AR, but also some prints that are doing purely online based experiences and actually bringing people together for events completely virtually, which I think ties into that other question about Microsoft Mesh and mixed reality. How do we actually make events that bring people together instead of just on a Zoom screen? And so there's a lot of work being done around that, especially within mixed reality. And that kind of also is part of the other question about how are we solving workspace design from an experiential standpoint? So how do we have a meeting? How do we talk about the same thing? I think a lot of us as a designer perspective, physical objects and real samples and materials matter. And like I'm sure a lot of us have been dealing with like FedEx deliveries to our apartments for all of our samples, which has just been a nightmare, this whole process. But that's a big portion of how we use our offices. How do we kind of get the sense and sensibilities of a material before we actually use it is super important. And I think mixed reality will be a good part of that in terms of collaboration. But I do think there are going to be some hardware pieces coming out soon that can leverage Microsoft Mesh, but that also can leverage more of our personal devices so that you don't require an expensive piece of hardware in order to collaborate with someone, which is, I think, the beauty of Zoom.
Yeah, if I hope you guys can hear me.
Yeah, we hear you, Dee.
My headphone debacle. I think that mixed reality, extended reality is something we're constantly considering and looking at and kind of like exploring the capabilities of. But I think what's important for us as a studio is to not necessarily, and this is kind of important for our process, is not to become necessarily like technophiles and like obsessed with the latest and greatest. Like really for us, it still always comes down to how to make compelling physical spaces for people and how to embed those spaces with an increased capacity for narrative. And whether that's through a totally like augmented reality, mixed reality experience with, HoloLens or Magic Leap, or, kind of speculative projects thinking about like what space will be like when we're all wearing those contact lenses. I think it's still going to come down to the experience of space and the storytelling of space and the kind of way that that a person fits into the built environment. And so, of course, we're always just exploring the potentials of emerging tech, but really with an eye for like thinking about like how we can use that to bring space to life and embed space with narrative.
With that, we should draw to a close.
I'm here.
Lisa's here to control
to help
the
with
police.
that.
Yeah.
Thank
you so much. That was a really interesting presentation, and we thank you for sharing your amazing work, and we look forward to seeing a lot more of it. Thank you everybody for attending. We have recorded this session and it will be available on the Neocon website by the end of the week. We hope you'll join us tomorrow as well for 2 additional programs of this series. One's with Gensler and one is with Hush. And we thank you again for joining us. Take care, guys.
Thank you.